The year is 1888. In the heart of London, one of the most anticipated weddings of the season is about to unfold. Every detail from the lilies of the valley, flown in from France, to the 16-foot train on the wedding gown, has been meticulously arranged by the bride herself, Miss Rosalind Ashford. She is marrying not just for love, but for a perfect future with the dashing Duke Alistair Beaumont. She has organized the perfect day, the perfect life. But perfection is a fragile illusion. Just moments before she is to walk down the aisle, a search for her groom leads her to the library, where she sees a sight that shatters her world in a single, silent heartbeat. The Duke, her fiancé. Her future locked in a passionate kiss with her own cousin. This is not just a story of a wedding gone wrong. It is the story of a woman's life utterly unraveling, and the dark secrets that hide behind the most gilded of facades. The air in the Ashford townhouse on Belgravia Square hummed with a frantic, yet exquisitely controlled energy. It was the morning of Saturday, the 3rd of May, 1888, and the culmination of Rosalind Ashford's life's work, or so it felt. Every single detail of her wedding to His Grace Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Northwood, had passed through her discerning hands. Rosalind stood before the full-length pier glass, a vision in ivory silk and Alençon lace. The gown, a masterpiece by the House of Worth in Paris, was her own design, a testament to her precise and artistic nature. It was not merely a dress. It was a statement. It spoke of tradition, elegance, and an unshakable confidence in the future she had so carefully constructed. "Oh, Rosalind, you are breathtaking," whispered her mother, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Simply the most beautiful bride I have ever seen." Rosalind managed a calm smile, though a hummingbird beat against her ribs. "Thank you, Mother." "Is everything proceeding on schedule downstairs?" "Perfectly," her mother assured her. "The Archbishop has arrived. The guests are seated. And Alistair, well, your Duke awaits." Alistair. The thought of him sent a genuine warmth through her. Duke Alistair Beaumont was everything a woman of her standing could wish for. He was devastatingly handsome, with dark hair that curled just so, at his collar and eyes the colour of a stormy sea. His title was one of the oldest in England, and his charm was legendary. But more than that, he seemed to understand her. He admired her intelligence, her organizational prowess, calling her his Duchess of Details. He made her feel seen, not just as an heiress to the Ashford industrial fortune, but as a partner. Her cousin Isabel Croft adjusted the gossamer veil over Rosalind's intricately coiled auburn hair. Isabel, the daughter of her mother's less fortunate sister, had lived with them for years. She was small and blonde, with wide cornflower blue eyes that often held a look of doe-like vulnerability. "You are a queen," Rosie Isabel said, her voice soft. "He won't be able to breathe when he sees you. Let's hope he maintains just enough breath to say, 'I do.'" Rosalind quipped, her nerves finally bubbling into a flicker of humour. She gave her reflection one last appraising look. Everything was in its place. The pearl and diamond tiara, a Beaumont heirloom, sat nestled in her hair. The scent of lilies of the valley, her chosen flower, filled the room from the magnificent bouquet on her dressing table. It was perfect, all of it. "I should like a moment alone with Alistair before the ceremony begins," Rosalind announced, a sudden romantic whim. "Just a moment. A final one before we are husband and wife." Her mother hesitated. "It's not traditional, dear." "We shall make it our own tradition," Rosalind said with a smile that brooked no argument. "I will find him. Isabel, you can fetch me in 5 minutes." Leaving her mother and maids to their happy flustering, Rosalind slipped out of the room. The house was a symphony of her creation. The string quartet was softly playing Vivaldi in the grand hall. The floral arrangements cascaded from every surface, and the scent of beeswax and expensive perfume hung in the air. She felt a swell of pride. She knew Alistair would likely be in her father's library, sharing a final glass of brandy with Lord Ashford. Her father, a man more comfortable with ledgers than pleasantries, was fond of Alistair, seeing in him the aristocratic polish their own industrial wealth couldn't buy. The library door was slightly ajar. Rosalind paused outside her hand, raised to knock, wanting to savour the moment. The murmur of voices came from within. She couldn't hear her father. Perhaps he had already gone to the church. It was just Alistair then, likely speaking to his best man, Lord Harrington. She pushed the heavy oak door open, silently, a playful smile on her lips, ready to surprise him. The smile froze, then melted from her face, replaced by a mask of crystalline shock. The room was cast in the soft morning light, filtering through the tall, mullioned windows. And in that light, silhouetted against a towering shelf of leather-bound books, stood Alistair, her duke. He was not alone. His hands were tangled in the pale blonde hair of the woman in his arms, his body pressed against hers. He was kissing her. Not a gentle stolen peck, but a kiss of desperate, consuming passion. A kiss of familiarity and secrets. And the woman he was kissing her face turned just enough for Rosalind to see the flush on her cheek and the blissful surrender in her eyes, was Isabel, her sweet, vulnerable cousin. The world did not crash around Rosalind. There was no sound, no scream. Instead, a profound and terrifying silence descended, hollowing her out from the inside. The Vivaldi playing in the hall seemed 1,000 miles away. The scent of lilies suddenly turned cloying funereal. In that one silent, devastating moment, Rosalind Ashford understood that her perfect day, her perfect future, was a perfectly constructed lie. And she was the only one who hadn't known. For a long, suspended moment, Rosalind remained frozen in the doorway, an unwilling statue in silk and lace. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of lists and logistics, was utterly terrifyingly blank. It was as if the intricate tapestry of her life had been snagged on a nail, and she could only watch as the threads pulled one by one until there was nothing left but a tangled, meaningless heap. It was the small sound, a soft sigh from Isabel, that finally broke the spell, the sound of contentment. It was like a shard of glass in Rosalind's heart. Alistair pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. He murmured something against Isabel's lips, something Rosalind couldn't hear, but the intimacy of the gesture was another blow. Then his eyes, dark and clouded with passion, drifted towards the door. They met Rosalind's. Panic flared in his gaze, raw and ugly. He shoved Isabel away from him so abruptly she stumbled back against the desk, her hand flying to her mouth. Her wide cornflower eyes, now filled with terror, locked onto Rosalind. The picture of innocence shattered, revealing something calculating and cold beneath. Rosalind Alistair breathed his voice a hoarse rasp. He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched as if to ward off a blow. This is not what it appears. The sheer insulting stupidity of the words was what finally galvanized her. A cold, hard fury, unlike any emotion she had ever felt, rose from the pit of her stomach. It was not a hot, screaming rage, but an arctic chill that clarified her thoughts and steadied her trembling hands. Not what it appears, she repeated, her voice unnaturally calm, devoid of all its usual warmth. Each word was a perfectly formed icicle. You are standing in my father's library moments before our wedding, with your lips on my cousin. Pray tell, Alistair, what is the alternative interpretation? Isabel began to sob, a theatrical, wrenching sound. Rosie, please. It was a mistake. I was so overwhelmed with emotion for you for the day. The Duke was merely comforting me. I tripped. Rosalind's gaze shifted to her cousin. The sight of Isabel's crumpled, pitiable act only hardened her resolve. You tripped, Rosalind said flatly. You tripped into his embrace. You tripped into his kiss. You have lived under my roof, eaten at my table, worn dresses my father paid for. You have stood beside me for months, helping me plan every detail of this day, all while doing this. Rosalind, my darling, listen to me, Alistair pleaded, stepping closer. He looked absurd, a man of immense power and privilege, reduced to a desperate, cornered animal. It was a moment of madness, of foolishness. It meant nothing. You are the one I love. You are the one I want to be my Duchess. He reached for her hand. Rosalind snatched it back as if his touch were fire. Do not, she commanded, the steel in her voice, making him flinch, call me darling, ever again. And do not insult my intelligence. That was not a moment. That was a history. Her mind, now sharp and ruthless, was replaying the past months. The lingering glances between Alistair and Isabel she had dismissed as familial affection. The times they were left alone together while she was consulting with the caterer or the florist. Isabel's constant, effusive praise of the Duke, which Rosalind had taken for loyalty. It had all been happening right in front of her, a play for which she was the unwitting audience, and it seemed the primary financier. The full weight of the humiliation hit her. The guests waiting, the Archbishop, her parents, the whole of London society gathered to witness her triumph would instead witness her utter ruin. She, Rosalind Ashford, the woman who never made a mistake, had made the biggest mistake of her life. Without another word to the two traitors in the library, she turned. Her movements were stiff, robotic. She walked out of the library, closing the door softly behind her, a gesture of finality, more chilling than any slam. She saw her father at the far end of the hall, looking magnificent in his morning coat, a nervous but proud smile on his face. When he saw her expression, the smile vanished. Rosalind, my dear girl, what is it? You're as white as your gown. She walked directly to him, her 16-foot train whispering over the polished marble floor behind her. She looked her father directly in the eye, the industrialist who had taught her the value of cutting one's losses. Father, she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating in the grand hall, and causing the string quartet to falter into silence. There will be no wedding. A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the assembled staff, and the few early guests lingering in the hall. Lord Ashford stared at her, uncomprehending. What are you saying? Is this some bridal jest? The Duke has proven himself unsuitable, she said, choosing her words with lethal precision. I will not be marrying him. Not today. Not ever. She began to walk towards the grand staircase. Her mother, drawn by the silence, appeared at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of confusion. Rosalind. What is the meaning of this? Rosalind ignored her. She began to ascend the stairs, each step an act of monumental will. The guests who had been milling outside were now pressing into the hall, their faces a mixture of shock and salacious curiosity. The whispers started a venomous hiss that would soon become a roar across London. She reached her room and walked in, closing the door on the rising chaos. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the remnants of her perfect morning. The discarded wrap, the half-empty cup of tea. She moved to the dressing table and looked at the magnificent bouquet of lilies of the valley, flowers that symbolized a return to happiness. With a sudden violent gesture, she swept them from the table. The crystal vase shattered on the floor, scattering flowers, water, and shards of glass across the expensive rug. Then, and only then, did the Arctic composure finally crack. A single ragged sob escaped her lips. She sank onto the chaise lounge, her perfect gown pooling around her like a shroud, and stared into the horrifying emptiness of the future. The wedding was over. The scandal was just beginning. The scandal broke, not like a wave, but like a tsunami. London society, starved for genuine drama, feasted on the carcass of the Ashford-Beaumont wedding. The initial narrative, spun with practiced ease by the Beaumonts, painted Rosalind as a hysterical, unstable bride who had suffered a last-minute collapse of nerve. It was tragic, they murmured over their tea and port, but not entirely surprising. Miss Ashford was always so intense. Rosalind, however, refused to play the part of the fragile victim. At her insistence, her father's solicitor released a terse, cold statement. To the Times, by mutual agreement, the engagement between His Grace, the Duke of Northwood, and Miss Rosalind Ashford has been terminated. The words mutual agreement were a sharp public refutation of the Beaumont story, a subtle declaration of war that society connoisseurs dissected for weeks. But the whispers followed her everywhere. In the park, at the opera, even in her own home, she felt the weight of pitying glances and cruel speculation. Belgravia had become a gilded cage. Within a fortnight, she knew she could not stay. "I am going to Blackwood Manor," she announced to her parents one evening. Blackwood Manor was the Ashford family's least fashionable property, a stark, imposing house perched on a remote stretch of the Cornish coast, inherited from a distant relative. It was a place of wind and stone and sea, a world away from the suffocating propriety of London. Her father, his face etched with worry, agreed. "The sea air will do you good. Take as long as you need, my dear." The journey itself was a kind of purification. As the train rattled west, the manicured fields of the home counties gave way to the wild, untamed beauty of Cornwall. When she finally arrived, the house was just as she remembered from childhood visits, grey granite walls that seemed to grow out of the cliff itself, windows that stared out at the moody expanse of the Atlantic and the constant roaring soundtrack of the surf. Here she was not the jilted bride of London. She was simply Miss Ashford. The small staff managed by the stoic Mrs. Gable treated her with a respectful distance. For the first few weeks, Rosalind did nothing. She walked for hours along the cliff paths, the wind whipping her hair and scouring the tears from her cheeks. She let the raw power of the landscape dwarf her own pain. She read not the frivolous novels of the season, but dense books on engineering and architecture from the manor's neglected library. She was rebuilding herself stone by stone, just like the house she inhabited. It was during one of her walks that she met him. She had ventured further than usual, following a treacherous path down towards a small, secluded cove where construction was underway on a new sea wall, a vital project to protect the local fishing village from the winter storms. A man stood near a rudimentary drafting table set up on the shingle, his back to her. He was not dressed like a local labourer. His coat was of good quality, though weathered, and he held himself with an air of quiet authority. He turned as she approached his attention, caught by the crunch of her boots on the stones. He was not handsome in the classical aristocratic way Alastair had been. His features were stronger, more angular, as if carved from the same granite as the cliffs. His hair was a dark, unruly brown, and his eyes, a startlingly clear grey, were intelligent and direct. He looked at her not with deference, but with frank curiosity. "You're a long way from the main house, miss." He said, his voice a pleasant baritone, with no trace of a Cornish accent. "The path can be unstable here." "I am more stable than the path, I assure you," Rosalind replied, her tone cooler than she intended. She was not used to being addressed so plainly. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "I have no doubt. I am Nathaniel Sterling." He gestured to the half-finished wall of massive interlocking stones. "I'm the engineer overseeing this project. Rosalind Ashford," she said, simply omitting any title. "The owner of this land." Nathaniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, a pleasure, Miss Ashford. I was told you were in residence. I hope our work doesn't disturb your peace." "The sound of progress is rarely a disturbance, Mr. Sterling," she said, her gaze drawn to the complex schematics pinned to his table. They were detailed, precise, and brilliant in their simplicity. "This design, the interlocking keystones, it's a modification of a Roman technique, isn't it? To better dissipate the kinetic energy of the waves." Nathaniel stared at her, his polite, professional demeanor replaced by genuine surprise. "It is. Most landlords I encounter are concerned only with the cost, not the mechanics. A foolish landlord ignores the mechanics that prevent his property from being washed into the sea," she retorted. "It is an investment in permanence." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious expression into something warm and unexpectedly engaging. "A sentiment I wholeheartedly agree with." "Perhaps you'd care for a closer look." For the next hour, Rosalind forgot she was a woman with a broken heart. She was simply an intelligent mind engaging with another. Nathaniel Sterling spoke of stress-bearing loads, tidal forces, and geological surveys with a passion she had previously only associated with art or music. He didn't condescend to her or simplify his explanations. He treated her as an equal, answering her sharp questions and even incorporating one of her suggestions about the angle of the upper courses. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, she finally remembered herself. "I must be getting back," she said, a little flustered. "Allow me to walk you to the main path," he offered. "It's darker in the shadows of the cliffs." They walked in a comfortable silence for a time, the roar of the sea their only accompaniment. "You're not like the other ladies from London," Nathaniel said at last, his tone observational rather than flirtatious. "Is that a compliment or an accusation, Mr. Sterling?" "It's a statement of fact, Miss Ashford," he replied, his grey eyes meeting hers. "And from my perspective, it's a high compliment indeed." That night, for the first time in months, Rosalind didn't dream of the library of Alistair or of Isabel's triumphant tear-streaked face. She dreamed of the sea and of the steady, unshakable strength of a wall built to withstand the storm. Life at Blackwood Manor settled into a new, quiet rhythm. The days were marked by the tides, not by the social calendar. Rosalind's walks along the cliff paths became a daily ritual, and they almost always led her to the cove where Nathaniel Sterling was taming the sea. Their conversations, which began with engineering, slowly broadened to include literature, politics, and their starkly different lives. Nathaniel was the son of a Midlands factory owner, a self-made man who had earned his place at Cambridge through scholarships and sheer grit. He possessed a deep-seated integrity and a disdain for the idle aristocracy that Rosalind found both refreshing and, to her surprise, attractive. He saw her not as the wealthy Miss Ashford or the disgraced fiancée of a duke, but as Rosalind, a woman with a formidable intellect and a wounded but resilient spirit. He was, she realized, the first man who had ever truly seen her. Her healing was a slow, gradual process. The sharp, agonizing pain of betrayal had dulled into a persistent, heavy ache. Letters from her dear friend in London, Lady Beatrice Finch, were her only link to the world she had left behind. Beatrice, a sharp-witted and fiercely loyal woman, filled her pages with society gossip, carefully omitting any mention of Alistair until one fateful letter arrived in late August. My dearest Rosalind, Beatrice wrote, I hesitate to broach this subject, but I feel you must know. The Duke and your cousin are now inseparable. They are seen everywhere together, and the narrative they have so carefully woven has, I'm afraid, taken root. The talk is that Alistair, heartbroken by your flightiness, has found comfort in the gentle, stable arms of Isabel. They are the tragic lovers, and you, my dear, have been cast as the villainess. It is infuriating and utterly unjust. Rosalind read the words with a cold knot forming in her stomach. It was not sorrow she felt, but a renewed sense of rage at their audacity. They had not only betrayed her, but were now actively destroying her reputation to sanctify their own sordid affair. She was discussing the letter with Nathaniel a few days later, sitting on a large, sun-warmed boulder overlooking the construction. The sea wall was nearly complete, a proud, curving structure that already looked as if it had been there for centuries. It is the way of your world, is it not? Nathaniel said, his brow furrowed in sympathy. Reputation is a currency, and they are spending yours to enrich themselves. I should have expected it, Rosalind said bitterly. Isabel always coveted what I had. I simply never imagined she would be so bold, or that Alistair would be so weak. Perhaps it is not weakness, Nathaniel mused, tossing a flat stone and watching it skip across the waves. Perhaps it is something else, entirely. His words were prophetic. The very next day, a package arrived from London. It was not from Beatrice. The package was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address, simply her name and Blackwood Manor, Cornwall, written in an unfamiliar, spidery script. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. Tucked into the first page was a single sheet of cheap paper, on which was written a short, cryptic message. Miss Ashford, you do not know me, but I was a lady's maid in the service of the Dowager Duchess of Northwood for 20 years. I was dismissed without cause shortly after your engagement was announced. Your pride was not the only victim on your wedding day. What happened was not about love or passion. Look to the Beaumont ledgers. It was never about your heart. It was about the Ashford holdings. Be careful. They will not hesitate to ruin you completely. It was unsigned. Rosalind's blood ran cold. She sank into a chair, the note trembling in her hand. It was never about your heart. It was about the Ashford holdings. The words echoed in her mind, reframing everything. The whirlwind courtship. Alistair's seemingly modern admiration for her business acumen. His keen interest in her father's shipping contracts and railway investments. She had seen it as a sign of a progressive partner. What if it had been the cold assessment of a predator, the kiss? Had it truly been a spontaneous act of passion, or something more calculated? The timing of it just moments before the ceremony, ensuring maximum chaos and humiliation. The narrative that followed, painting her as unstable. It all suddenly seemed less like a crime of passion and more like a meticulously executed strategy. But why, if they simply wanted her money, why not marry her? Why the public reputation-destroying spectacle? She found Nathaniel at the work site, his face smudged with dust as he directed the placement of the final capstan. She showed him the note. He read it twice, his expression hardening from concern to grim understanding. "This changes everything," he said, his voice low. "This isn't a matter of a broken heart anymore. Rosalind, this is fraud, conspiracy." "The Beaumont ledgers," Rosalind whispered, her mind racing. "Alistair's family is one of the most powerful in England. Their wealth is supposed to be measureless." "Supposed to be" are the operative words, Nathaniel said, his practical mind immediately seizing on the core of the issue. Titles are not liquid assets. An old house costs a fortune to maintain. It's entirely possible the Duke of Northwood is drowning in debt. A dark, terrifying picture began to form. A desperate duke, a crumbling dynasty, and a wealthy industrialist's daughter as the perfect solution. But the puzzle pieces still didn't quite fit. Why involve Isabel? Why risk everything on such a scandalous public betrayal? I have to go back, Rosalind said, a new and dangerous resolve solidifying within her. She would not be the tragic heroine wasting away by the sea. They had tried to cast her as the villain, then the victim. Now she would be the investigator. I have to go back to London. Nathaniel looked at her, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw no fear there, only a cold, burning determination. You won't be going alone, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. They have underestimated you, Rosalind. Now we will make them pay for it. Returning to London was like stepping back into a fever dream. The city felt the same, the clatter of carriages on cobblestones, the smell of coal smoke and rain, the suffocating press of the crowds. But Rosalind was different. The Cornish wind had scoured away her naivete, replacing it with a steely resolve. She was no longer running from a scandal. She was walking into the heart of a conspiracy. Nathaniel, true to his word, accompanied her. He took modest rooms near his engineering firm's London office, providing Rosalind with a steadfast ally outside the rarefied bubble of her social class. His presence was a grounding force, a constant reminder that this was not a society drama, but a serious investigation. Rosalind re-established herself, not in the family's Belgravia townhouse, which felt tainted by memory, but in a smaller, more private residence her father owned in Mayfair. She sent a note to her one trusted confidant, Lady Beatrice Finch, requesting an urgent and discreet meeting. Beatrice arrived, her face a mixture of shock and delight. Rosalind, to see you back in this viper's nest, you are either braver or more foolish than I thought. A bit of both, perhaps, Rosalind said, handing her the anonymous note. Beatrice's eyes, usually sparkling with wit, narrowed as she read. Good heavens, she breathed. The Ashford holdings. Of course. It makes a dreadful kind of sense. The Beaumonts have been living on their name for decades. Rumour has it the Dowager Duchess has sold off 3 Titians and a Gainsborough just to keep the roof on Northwood Castle. This was the first piece of corroborating evidence. I need more than rumours, Beatrice. I need proof, financial records, letters, anything that can expose them. Beatrice tapped her chin, her mind already working. The Dowager's former maid. If we could find her, she might know more. As for the ledgers, that's a fortress. But there are other ways. Society is built on a network of staff, butlers, footmen, maids. They see everything. And for the right price, or the right motivation, they talk. Thus began their clandestine operation. Beatrice, with her unparalleled access to every drawing room and social event, became the spymaster. She gathered whispers, observed interactions, and identified potential sources. Rosalind, using a portion of her personal allowance, became the paymaster, meeting discreetly with disgruntled staff who held grudges against the arrogant Beaumonts. Nathaniel, with his logical engineering mind, became the analyst, piecing together the disparate bits of information into a coherent timeline. Their first breakthrough came from a former footman of the Beaumont household, a young man named Thomas, who had been dismissed for spilling wine on a guest. The Duke's finances are a disaster, miss, he told Rosalind in a hushed conversation in the back of a dimly lit bookshop. Creditors at the door every week. He was gambling heavily, trying to win his way out of the hole his father left him in. The pressure from the Dowager Duchess was immense. She kept saying the Ashford marriage was their only salvation. This confirmed the motive. The Beaumonts were not just financially strained, they were desperate. The next piece came from one of Isabel's own former acquaintances, a young woman from a similar poor relation background. "Isabel always resented you, Miss Ashford," she confessed over tea. "She said you had everything without trying, while she had to smile and scrape for every scrap of comfort. She once told me, 'One day I'll be the one they all look at.'" She saw the Duke not just as a man, but as a shortcut to the life she believed she deserved. This painted Isabel not as a simple pawn, but as an ambitious co-conspirator. But the central question remained, why the public implosion? Why not just secure the Ashford fortune through marriage? The answer began to surface when Nathaniel, using his professional connections, made some inquiries into Lord Ashford's business dealings. "Your father is a brilliant but cautious man," Nathaniel explained one evening, spreading papers across the table in Rosalind's study. "The marriage contract he drew up was exceptionally shrewd. Your dowry was substantial, but control of the bulk of the Ashford industrial assets. The factories, the shipping lines would only pass to your husband, Alistair, upon two conditions: the birth of a male heir and your father's passing. Until then, you would retain significant control." Rosalind's eyes widened. "So marrying me didn't give him immediate access to the real money?" "Precisely," Nathaniel said. "It gave him an allowance, but it wouldn't solve his immediate, crushing debt. He would still be at the mercy of his creditors and under your financial thumb for years." A chilling thought began to form in Rosalind's mind. But there was another clause, wasn't there? A breach of contract clause. Nathaniel nodded grimly. A standard one. If one party unjustifiably broke the engagement within a month of the wedding, they would be liable for a significant penalty payable to the aggrieved party. In this case, £100,000. £100,000. A fortune. Enough to clear Alistair's most pressing gambling debts and keep his creditors at bay for a year or more. Suddenly, the chaotic scene in the library looked horrifyingly clear. "They didn't want to marry me," Rosalind whispered, the full, monstrous scope of the plan dawning on her. "They wanted to compel me to break the engagement. They staged that kiss, knowing I would see it, knowing my pride would never allow me to go through with the wedding after such a public humiliation. And to make sure you were seen as the guilty party, they preemptively created the narrative of your instability," Nathaniel added. "They ruin your reputation, you break the contract, and they walk away, appearing to be the victims with enough money to solve their immediate crisis while they look for a new, more pliable heiress." It was diabolical. A plot so cruel and cynical it took her breath away. They hadn't just broken her heart, they had tried to bankrupt her family's name and turn her into a public laughingstock for profit. "They have the money now," Rosalind said, her voice hard as diamond. "My father, in his grief and anger, paid the penalty without question, just to be rid of the Beaumont name forever." "Then we need to find the one thing that can prove it all," Nathaniel said, his hand covering hers on the table. "We need to find the letter, the one that proves the conspiracy, the one that shows the kiss was not an accident, but an act." Their hunt had a new focus. They were no longer just looking for motive. They were looking for the weapon itself. The search for a single piece of incriminating paper in a city as vast as London felt like an impossible task. Their network of informants provided context and motive, but the concrete proof, a letter, a note, a telegram, remained elusive. Alistair and Isabel were far too cunning to leave such a document lying around. The key, Rosalind realized, would be the anonymous maid. Beatrice put all her resources into locating her dispatching agents to registry offices and domestic employment agencies. After 2 weeks of dead ends, they found her, a Mrs. Helen Croft, no relation to Isabel, living in a small but tidy flat in Lambeth, paid for it, turned out, by a generous severance from the Dowager Duchess. Rosalind went to see her alone. Mrs. Croft was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet dignity. She was wary at first, but upon seeing the genuine plea in Rosalind's expression, she relented. "The Dowager is a viper in velvet gloves, Miss Ashford," she said, pouring tea with a steady hand. "She rules that house with fear. She found out her son was writing to your cousin Isabel, intimate letters, but instead of being angry, she saw an opportunity." Rosalind leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What kind of opportunity? The Beaumonts needed your father's money, immediately, not in 10 years when an heir came of age. The Dowager and the Duke, they devised the plan together. They would use Isabel. They coached her. They needed a public spectacle, one that would force your hand and trigger the penalty clause in the marriage contract." Alistair was to write one final letter to Isabel, detailing the plan for the final performance, as he called it in the library. Here it was. The proof. "Where is that letter, Mrs. Croft?" The old maid sighed. "That is the problem. I saw him write it. I saw the envelope addressed to Miss Croft, but I never saw it delivered. The Dowager found out I knew about their scheme. I overheard them arguing. She dismissed me the next day with a year's wages and a threat to my life if I ever spoke a word of it. I believe she intercepted the letter herself. It was too dangerous even for them. She likely burned it." The hope that had surged in Rosalind's chest plummeted. Without the letter, it was all just hearsay, her word against a duke's. She returned to Mayfair despondent. "It's gone," she told Nathaniel. "The Dowager probably destroyed it." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, staring into the fireplace. A woman like that, a viper in velvet gloves, destroying evidence is one option, but blackmail is another. She's a chess player, Rosalind. Why destroy a piece that gives you absolute power over your son's co-conspirator? What if she didn't burn it? What if she's keeping it as insurance to ensure Isabel never gets too ambitious, never demands more than her allotted share? A spark of possibility ignited in the darkness. It was a terrifying gamble, but it was the only one they had left. The annual Azure Ball, hosted by the Marquess of Danbury, was the glittering apex of the London season. Beatrice confirmed that the Duke, the Dowager Duchess, and Isabel would all be in attendance. It would be their first major public appearance, as a seemingly united front, a final cementing of the narrative that Alistair had found his true love after his tragic ordeal. Rosalind's arrival at the ball was a detonation. The moment she stepped into the ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. She was not dressed in mourning black or demure grey, but in a gown of deep crimson silk that clung to her figure like a flame. Her auburn hair was piled high, and the Ashford diamonds glittered at her throat. She was not a victim seeking pity, she was a queen returning to claim her throne. Beside her, tall and implacably calm in his evening wear, was Nathaniel Sterling. She saw them across the room, Alistair looking dashing, but with a flicker of panic in his eyes. The Dowager Duchess, a formidable galleon in purple satin, her face an unreadable mask, and Isabel clinging to Alistair's arm, wearing a gown of pale blue, a picture of insipid innocence. But Rosalind could see the triumphant glint in her eyes. The confrontation had to be precise, surgical. Rosalind, with Nathaniel and Beatrice at her side, moved through the parting sea of onlookers and approached the Beaumont party. "Your Grace Rosalind," said her voice, carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Alistair flinched. "Miss Ashford the Dowager," said her voice like splintering ice. "We are surprised to see you out." "I'm sure you are," Rosalind replied, her eyes locking with the old woman's. "I find that when one has been robbed, it's best not to hide away at home." Alistair stepped forward. "This is neither the time nor the place for such dramatics, Rosalind." "On the contrary," Rosalind said coolly, "I think this is the perfect place. Among all these people who have heard your version of the story for months." She then turned her full attention to Isabel. "You look lovely, cousin. Tell me, does the guilt of your conspiracy ever keep you awake at night? Or does the £100,000 you helped steal from my family help you sleep soundly?" Isabel paled dramatically. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." Rosalind pressed on her voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more menacing. "I'm talking about a plan, a final performance. I'm talking about a letter, the one Alistair wrote you, detailing how you would stage a kiss in my father's library to trick me into breaking our engagement." Alistair looked ashen. "This is madness." There was no such letter. "Wasn't there?" Rosalind said now, turning back to the Dowager Duchess, playing her final desperate card. "Or perhaps you have it, Your Grace. A wise woman like you would surely keep such a valuable document. A perfect piece of insurance to keep a grasping little nobody like Isabel in her place should she ever forget who the true Duchess of Northwood is." It was a direct hit. The Dowager's composure finally cracked. A flicker of pure fury crossed her face. For a single fatal second, she glanced instinctively towards the small, ornate reticule clutched in her hand. It was all the confirmation Rosalind needed. "You have it with you," Rosalind said, her voice ringing with triumph. "Right there in your bag. The proof that you orchestrated the entire thing. That you are not victims but thieves and frauds." The crowd was in an uproar of whispers. The Dowager, realizing her mistake, drew herself up. "This is a preposterous accusation." But it was too late. Isabel, seeing the game was up and terrified that the Dowager would use the letter to ruin her and save her own family, broke down completely. "She made us do it," Isabel shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the Dowager. "It was her plan and she has the letter. She promised me a share, but she was going to cast me aside." The dam had burst. The entire sordid, ugly truth flooded the Danbury ballroom. Alistair stood speechless and condemned. The Dowager looked at Isabel with pure, murderous hatred. Rosalind Ashford, in her gown of crimson, simply watched as the house of cards she had so carefully exposed came crashing down around them. The game was over. She had won. The fallout from the Azure Ball was swift and merciless. Society, which had moments before been sipping the Beaumont's poison, turned on them with the ferocity of a starved wolf pack. Isabel Croft's hysterical confession, witnessed by half the peerage, was irrefutable. The story of the Duke's duplicity and the Dowager's diabolical scheme was on every lip in every newspaper column. They were not just disgraced, they were annihilated. Lord Ashford, armed with the truth, brought the full weight of his legal and financial power to bear. The Beaumonts, facing public ruin and criminal charges of fraud, were forced to capitulate. The £100,000 penalty was returned with interest, and a further undisclosed sum for damages to the Ashford name. The Dowager was forced to sell Northwood Castle and its remaining contents to cover their debts, retiring in ignominy to a small dower house in Bath. Alistair fled to the continent, a disgraced duke with an empty title. Isabel Croft, cast out by both families and shunned by all of society, disappeared, completely rumoured to have taken a position as a paid companion in some dreary corner of the country. Rosalind, however, did not revel in their destruction. She had not sought vengeance but justice. Her name was cleared, her family's honour restored. She was no longer seen as the unstable hysteric or the pitiful jilted bride. She was hailed as a woman of incredible strength and intelligence, who had faced down one of the most powerful families in England and emerged victorious. Suitors began to call again, drawn to her fortune and her newfound fame. But Rosalind had no interest in their titles or their practiced flattery. She had learned the difference between a gilded cage and a true partnership. She returned to Cornwall, not in exile, but in triumph. The autumn gales were beginning to blow, and she stood with Nathaniel on the cliff top, watching the colossal waves crash against the sea wall he had built. The stone held immovable and strong, turning the ocean's fury into harmless spray. "It's finished," he said, a quiet pride in his voice. "It will stand for 100 years. "A permanent investment," she replied, smiling at him. In the months they had spent in London, their partnership had deepened into a quiet, powerful love. It was a love built not on romantic whispers and grand gestures, but on mutual respect, shared intelligence, and the unwavering support they had shown one another in the face of crisis. He loved her for her mind and her resilience, not her dowry. She loved him for his integrity and his strength, not his title. "My father has been so impressed with my management of the recent unpleasantness," Rosalind said, turning to face him. "He has offered me a permanent position on the board of Ashford Industries. He wants me to oversee new expansion projects, railways, bridges, infrastructure." Nathaniel's grey eyes lit up. "Rosalind, that's wonderful. There's no one more capable. I told him I would accept." She continued, her heart beating a steady, happy rhythm on one condition: that I could bring on my own chief engineer, a man I trust implicitly, a man whose brilliance is matched only by his character. A slow, wonderful smile spread across Nathaniel's face. He reached out and took her hands, his grip warm and firm. "I think," he said, his voice soft, "that I would like that very much, Miss Ashford." "Rosalind," she corrected him gently. "Rosalind," he repeated. "I have a condition of my own, however." He let go of one of her hands and reached into his coat pocket. He didn't produce a velvet box with a garish diamond. Instead, he pulled out a small, smooth grey stone, worn into a perfect circle by the sea. It was a stone from the cove, from the foundation of his sea wall. "I cannot offer you a castle or a title," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can only offer you my name, my heart, and a promise to build a life with you. One that is strong and honest, and can withstand any storm. Rosalind Ashford, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Rosalind's eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was real. This was true. She had once organized the perfect wedding, a masterpiece of superficial details. It had all been a beautiful lie. Now she was being offered the foundation for a perfect life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carried on the sea wind. "Oh yes, Nathaniel, I will." He didn't have a ring, so he simply held the stone with her in the palm of her hand. It was not a symbol of wealth or status, but of something far more valuable: permanence, strength, and a love that was built to last. And so, Rosalind Ashford's story didn't end with the wedding she had planned, but began with the life she chose. She found that the greatest strength isn't in creating a perfect facade, but in having the courage to tear it down when you discover the truth. She traded a ducal coronet for a partnership of equals, and a life of stifling social obligation for one of purpose, innovation, and genuine love. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest heartbreaks are not endings, but violent, necessary beginnings shattering a life we thought we wanted to reveal the one we were truly meant to live. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please show your support. Click the like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share it with a friend who loves a story of a strong woman forging her own path. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more historical dramas that bring the past to life. Your support allows us to keep telling these tales. Thank you for listening.